Hi everyone, I'm Rachna Singh, and my book Phoenix in Flames has been recently released. This book is dedicated to ordinary women. You will not find these women in the pages of history, nor will paeans be sung for such women, but their pluck and determination to face adversities of life and emerge in a new avatar makes them extremely inspiring. And these stories needed to be told. So my book is about such women. There are 8 such women in my book, Phoenix in Flames, and I'm going to be reading out some excerpts of the stories of these women. The story which is perhaps closest to my heart is the story about Malini. Malini is a young mother who loses her very young 14-year-old son to cancer. And she finds herself caught up in a nightmare out of which she doesn't seem to be able to find a way out. But somehow she claws her way out of her anguish and grief. So I'm going to be just reading out an excerpt from Malini. Malini looked on with anguished eyes as Harbir lit the pyre with shaking hands. Slowly, the flames engulfed the wooden logs arranged around the wasted body of Sahaj. His dear face looked serene in repose, as though relieved to be finally unshackled from the unrelenting pain and discomfort that had dogged the final month of his illness. She wanted to snatch him away from the devouring flames, hold him in her arms, and never let him go. She took a leaden step towards the burning pyre with this half-formed thought, but was gently restrained by her beer. They both watched with empty eyes as the orange-blue flames performed the final dance of death, turning their living, breathing child to a handful of ashes. Dust to dust, ashes to ashes. Their Shravan was gone. Their only son, the apple of their eye, had been snatched away from them so brutally. Malini shook her fist at heaven. Why, God, why did you do this? So this is the beginning of the story. And then I'll read a small extract towards the end of the story, which talks about how she manages to claw her way out of her anguish and grief. No, she reprimanded herself. She would not let herself fall again into the quagmire of sorrow, or she would not be able to keep her promise. She went to a quiet corner of the park and sat down. Her face set in determined lines. She fished out a small notebook out of her jacket pocket and began to make notes. Speak to Aditya, their CA friend, about setting up an NGO. Speak to Raksha, who had set up an NGO for Adivasis in Chhattisgarh area. Speak to Monica Dutt, principal of a local school for the economically backward. Thus started Malini's long and difficult journey back to normalcy. The other story from which I would like to read out an excerpt is the story of Mrityunjay. Now, Mrityunjay means one who has triumphed over death. So this is the story of a woman who loses her father and then loses her beloved. But like Scarlett O'Hara of Gone with the Wind, she keeps chanting, tomorrow is another day, and somehow manages to find a way out of her anguish and pain. She came into the world, not bawling like other normal children, but silently. Her still, tiny form had the doctors wringing their hands in desperation. Her mother had been a VIP admission in the hospital in the tiny hamlet of Baduria, and an entire team of doctors had stood to attention during her mother's cesarean. After all, her father was the deputy commissioner of the city, but she had refused to utter a cry, bat an eyelid, or lift her chest up and pull air into her starved lungs. The doctors of the team fluttered around her father, trying to tell him about his stillborn child. The father, a tall, robust, and domineering man, rose to his full height and in a commanding voice said, "I want to see her." Before they could stop him, he strode into the operation theater and headed towards the tiny form swaddled in a white towel. As soon as he looked down at the tiny form of his baby, his eyes shone with a deep, abiding love. He bent down and picked up his little girl with tender, gentle care. And then, as if he could not help himself, he hugged the little form to his chest as tears fell down his cheeks. He wiped his tears with a firm hand and said with determination, "Wake up, my little one. Let me show you this big, beautiful world." The ensuing silence was broken by a soft gurgle. Then the little still form shuddered, and her eyes opened with reluctance, as though from a deep, satisfying sleep. What followed was pandemonium. The head nurse almost snatched the little form from the father's arm and, snapping out orders to the other members of the team, headed to the ICU at a run. The doctors ran checks on the little girl. Much to their surprise, they found nothing wrong with her, just a slight wheeze due to some mucus in the lungs. So this is how Mrityunjay comes into the world reluctantly. And then I will go to an excerpt towards the end of the story when she is in a coma and her mother is trying to get her out of her comatose state. Another day passed. Mao was getting desperate. She knew that the longer Mrityunjay stayed in coma, the harder it would be to come out of it. That evening, she held Mrityunjay's hand in an almost excruciating grip, trying to transfer positive energy and strength into her comatose body, trying to trigger a response from her. Mao talked to her as Ajoy would talk, forcefully, confidently. "Come on, dear child. You conquered death before. You can conquer it again. Your Baba believed you were the strongest person on earth and would surmount any problems life threw at you. Don't belie the faith your Baba had in you. Yes, Sridhar is gone. It is the sad truth. But he has left you with some beautiful memories. Keep them alive, but for that you have to decide to live. Your Baba always said, tomorrow is another day. You have to believe that, as Scarlett O'Hara did." Mao began to softly chant, "Tomorrow is another day. Tomorrow is another day." She felt a mild tremor in her hand. Surprised, she looked down. It was not her hand that trembled, but Mrityunjay's fingers that had trembled and transferred the tremor to her hand. She looked at Mrityunjay's face. The eyelids were fluttering, as though in readiness to open. She grabbed the bell and rang hard. The doctor and nurse in charge rushed in at the urgent summons. By then, Mrityunjay's eyes were wide open. Mao was caressing her hand with calming hands. "Ma," Mrityunjay whispered. "Sridhar." There was such pain and anguish in her voice that Mao's heart clenched in agony. "Tomorrow is another day, my child. Hold on to that thought like a talisman." "Yes, tomorrow is another day," said Mrityunjay in a soft whisper, closing her eyes and falling into a deep, sedated slumber. I won't read out any more of my stories. I just hope you can pick up the book and read it and enjoy it. They're painful stories, of course. A very dark landscape is there, very difficult to traverse. But if any of my readers find they end up with moisture in their eyes or tears, I would feel that my work as a storyteller is done.